They called it the day the sky turned, though no one could agree what exact hour to mark, sunrise, noon, or the instant the first buildings trembled like old teeth. At first it was a novelty. Newsfeeds flooded with shaky videos of the sun's light thinning, of satellites blinking out in low orbits. Conspiracy forums lit up, astronomers begged for patience, then the sea moved differently. Tides, once obedient to the moon's pull, hesitated and then surged where they had never surged before. Coastlines wrote new maps in hours. Reports came in from the equatorial belt, entire forests bending inland as a wind that smelled faintly of sulphur and iron swept across them. The air tasted metallic, people spat and coughed and learned to breathe differently. Venus, our neighbor bright as a coin, had always been a riddle behind blinding clouds. No one had asked that it notice us. No one had planned for the moment the planet tilted its attention and reached. The first thing Venus took was sound. Radios hummed and then fell silent, birdsong warped into low, keening tones. In cities, elevators groaned and stopped mid-ride as vibrations ran like cold fingers through concrete. At the edge of the Mediterranean, fishermen watched the horizon rise like a living hand. Nets came up filled with a new kind of glinting foam, and something like static clung to their skin. Space agencies convened emergency councils. Telescopes were pointed, probes recalculated, and old instruments that had been retired were dragged back into service. The scientific language grew urgent and blunt in press briefings. Gravitational perturbation, they said. Tidal interaction. They explained mathematics until the words themselves felt like prayers. The public heard something simpler. The heavens were pulling. People reacted the way people always react to impossible natural events, some with heroism, some with panic, some with quiet prayer. Streets filled with those who wanted to see, pilgrimage volatile and dangerous. At first, military leaders barked commands, then they listened. No missile ever left a bomber's bay that day. Bullets and bombs did not answer the new rule. This was not earthbound weather to be controlled. The ocean gave up a secret along with its water. Cities that had huddled on shores for centuries were peeled like lids. Arcades of glass and steel sloughed off into floating shards. Whole neighborhoods drifted like lost islands. There were miracles. A mother, hands numb with cold salt, held her child while a buoyant car bobbed by like driftwood and allowed them passage to a higher rooftop. Strangers who had argued over groceries hours before formed chains and carried people to safety, and tragedies multiplied. Hospitals reported devices failing, suction pulling at oxygen lines, at 4 bags, at fragile lungs. The elderly, rooted to home by age and habit, were the hardest to move. The scientists proposed theories in succession like surgeons offering incisions, atmospheric exchange, gravitational resonance, a cascade of electromagnetic anomalies. Each paper was an attempt to stitch understanding into the tearing fabric of the world. Venus did not scream or shout. Its movement was patient and steady, a slow choreography. The planet's heavy clouds rolled forward, a thick veil that began to blot familiar stars. At night the sky became a bruise, glowing along the eastern horizon with a sickly pearlescent light. The moon, faithful as ever, seemed to shrink, its pale face reluctantly giving up dominion to the swollen brightness. The pull affected iron first, some said, then water, then lesser things. Trains were derailed by invisible hands, bridges arched and rusted cables unhooked themselves like startled animals. A new smell settled into towns, ozone and melted plastics and something older, like the inside of a cave. Dogs howled until they found sleep or did not find it at all. Cats disappeared, slipping through fissures in reality as if doors had been placed where none had been before. Communication faltered. Satellites tumbled through warped paths and then, one by one, stopped showing up on monitors. People fell back on analog paper, voices, shouted orders, and found them strangely intimate. Pilots learned to land by touch and instinct. Boats learned to move like living things, steering by currents that could change in the time it took to think. The best navigators were not captains but small-town fishermen who read the sea like scripture. Cities inland fared differently. Some towers buckled, others remained upright, baffling engineers. The ground itself developed moods. In one valley it heaved and swallowed an old highway, in another it seemed to hold firm as if offering solid proof of stubbornness. Religion flourished and fractured. Some preachers called it judgment, others, reunion. New cults sprang up around Venus, not worship, exactly, but a kind of desperate attempt to appease a cosmic neighbor. People argued whether it made sense to move south, toward the equator where lines of force seemed to tangle less. Others argued for higher ground, higher towers, higher hope. Suitcases and pickup trucks formed long, pilgrim convoys down highways littered with abandoned bicycles. In labs, a team coined a term that went into the lexicon, Venus synchrony. It meant the Earth's rotation was being subtly tugged, the day length stretching by swallowed seconds that accumulated like debt. Clocks everywhere drifted from one another, and human routines frayed. Children adapted fastest. They climbed the new cliffs of drifted debris and made games of riding the swell of displaced air. Their laughter was like a language the planet had not intended to hear. Artists painted what they could not explain. Murals rose on sides of buildings that still stood, swirls of gold and green, faces with eyes looking toward the crescent-shaped brightness. The paintings kept a record of fear and wonder side by side. Governments tried to relocate capitals, to set up new grids for survival. Lines were drawn on maps. Borders, once so sharp with opinion, blurred with the logic of shelter. Alliances that had been diplomatic suddenly became logistical. A diplomat from a tiny island nation gave an impassioned speech that went viral for being neither panicked nor cold. "We are not victims," she said. "We are each other's lifelines." It became a slogan that fit on makeshift banners and the backs of hands. Venus's atmosphere, swirling at its edges, rubbed against Earth's like two enormous gears. The interaction created spectacular auroras in latitudes that had never seen them. People stood on hillsides to watch curtains of color they had only seen in textbooks, and yet these displays were not harmless. Magnetic storms knocked out grids, power flickered like a heartbeat. In the dark, communities gathered around generators and lanterns, telling stories until dawn must be redefined. Birds that could fly found new routes and sometimes did not return. Whales sang different songs that could be heard above the turbulence, and scientists recorded them as if saving the last pages of a dying language. There were days of bitter cold followed by sudden heat as air currents reconfigured. Crops failed in patches, but some species thrived, shocked into new cycles by the altered light. Agriculture became an exercise in improvisation. People clung to rituals. Weddings were held on rooftops with ropes and safety harnesses, because the old chapels were too damaged or too crowded. Funerals became floating processions where the living steered and the dead rode like honored cargo. A squad of engineers in a mountain town rebuilt a water pump using parts from school buses because the pump parts supply chain was gone. They worked by candlelight and told jokes to keep the hands steady. Their pump became a small miracle. There were attempts to push back. Massive tether arrays were proposed, cables anchored deep into rock to test whether human-made forces could counter planetary tidings. The projects asked for more resources than any one nation could offer. Volunteers came forward in droves for daring missions, to rescue a hospital trapped on a peninsula, to escort refrigerated trucks of vaccines through unstable bridges. Those missions were desperate and gorgeous in human terms. A scientist named Mara Young, famous for quiet stubbornness, proposed a different idea. If Venus could be reasoned with, perhaps it could be negotiated with. She spoke not in equations but metaphors, suggesting that sometimes celestial bodies behaved like weather, sometimes like living things. Her team sent a signal not of radio but of mass in motion, fleets of ballast ships to form a living peninsula of displacement, to test whether redirecting momentum could alter the tug. It was a small experiment with huge symbolism. The ships moved as one on a day when the eastern horizon bled into an impossible color. They held their formation against a current that wanted to pull them apart. For a moment, the tug eased. Cameras captured the crews cheering in rain-slicked jackets. That didn't stop the broader catastrophe. Cities still buckled elsewhere, and whole cultures revised their calendars to fit a new era. But the ship's success taught something crucial. The cosmos could be nudged, if not fully bargained with. Human creativity blossomed under pressure. Architects designed floating neighborhoods stitched together like quilts. Farmers built vertical gardens that sucked moisture from the air in ways old agronomy had never imagined. Children learned to pilot small craft with the confidence that made their parents both proud and terrified. Schools switched curriculum to survival. Physics taught through practical tasks, not just equations on a board. The economy reorganized. Currency mattered less than fuel and skill. People traded solar batteries for surgical supplies, songs for clean water. Commodities became items of tangible life. Venus's pull created new geography. Islands appeared where they had not been, and mountains cracked to show veins of minerals. Treasure hunters of a different sort scoured the exposed ocean floor for salvageable goods and the enigmatic things the sea coughed up. One discovery changed perception: an object, ancient and metallic, shaped like a bell and covered in strange pitting, found on a newly revealed shelf off the African coast. Some said it was of alien origin, others said it was a remnant of long-lost human industry. No one knew. The bell was taken to a lab where people argued for months about its origin while the rest of the world moved around it. When researchers finally struck it lightly, it did not ring so much as emit a low harmonic that seemed to sync with satellite interference. That tone, when played back, quieted people. It had no explanation, but it became a lullaby for the worried. Musicians sampled it into songs, nurses played it in wards, children hummed it and fell asleep. As seasons passed, societies adapted. Rituals and systems that had felt provisional hardened into traditions. Storytellers kept tally of the early days, dates, names, small acts of bravery that books would hold. Venus, for its part, did not relent nor did it punish. It simply continued its steady influence, an immense patient hand shaping outcomes with indifferent grace. People reconciled to living in a world that had been altered beyond a single lifetime's memory. Some couples remarried on boats under patchwork tents, some cities reorganized governance into neighborhood cooperatives. The meaning of home shifted from a single place to a portable sense of belonging. Years later, when the pull had lessened and the sky settled into a new, permanent tilt of light, historians would call the whole epoch the Great Reorientation. It became a dividing line in biographies and in maps. Children born in the new era learned of the before as a story told with reverence and a little fear, like tales of famines and wars. They visited museums where a corroded phone, a piece of rusted playground equipment, and a fragment of the bell were displayed together. Scholars argued about whether Venus had consciously sucked at Earth. Language softened, the verbs used in textbooks shifted from conquest to contact. Scientists conceded that the planet's dynamics were more complex than their first models had allowed. Some people never reconciled. They lived in enclaves doing rigorous research or quiet protest, insisting the world had been violated and that restitution was due. Others saw beauty in the changed sky and took to painting it on ceilings as a reminder of survival. The youngest generation, who had only known the new rhythm, invented festivals to celebrate the day the ships held formation and the lullaby tone stilled fear for an hour. They danced with scarves and lit small glass lanterns that bobbed like captive stars. Old recordings of the first tremors were played in classrooms, not to terrify but to teach. Teachers asked children to imagine the choices their ancestors had made: to leave, to stay, to help, and then to make one small brave choice of their own. Ultimately, Earth did not become Venus's moon or servant. The two planets continued their slow waltz, a complex interaction neither entirely destructive nor wholly benign. Humanity, stubborn and inventive, learned new ways to be small and vast at once. In the memoirs of an engineer who had tied ballast lines during that first successful fleet mission, she wrote, "We did not make the sky kinder. We learned how to be kinder under a sky that had been rearranged." And when the bell's tone, still puzzling, was played at the old engineer's funeral, people said it sounded like both an ending and a promise. They walked home under a sky that had been touched and had, in turn, taught them how to reach.